What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. It's time to look back at the Pac-12 and look back at the preseason predictions for this conference. I would say for the most part, this conference went about how we expected it to. You know, as far as your teams that finish in the top half, teams that finish in the bottom half. Most people had Utah, USC, Oregon. Those were kind of the teams up there near the top. UCLA was a kind of a dark horse team for a lot of people. My dark horses, my surprise teams to watch were Washington and Oregon State, who both turned out to be better than expected. And then the other one was Stanford. I missed the mark on Stanford. They did not have a good season at all. And again, I just missed on them. They were definitely not better than expected. David Shaw winds up resigning, and it's going to be a new era there at Stanford. We'll see how they do moving forward, but they did not have a great season this year, and there really wasn't a big disappointment. There wasn't a team that was hyped up, a top 25 preseason team or anything like that had a bad season. So again, it didn't go exactly as expected, but big picture wise, this conference I think did go pretty close to what most people expected. You take a look at the top half: USC, Washington, Oregon, Utah. Of course, Utah did go to the conference championship game and win it, so standings wise they should be at the top, but we're just looking at the overall records here. Oregon State, UCLA, and again, you look at these teams, look at the one-score games. Look at the teams at the top. USC and Washington, they played really well in one-score games, and that was really the difference. That's why they finished at number 1 and number 2 as far as overall records go. And then you look at Oregon, Utah, Oregon State, UCLA. They were basically a 500 in those one-score games, so they weren't really overrated or underrated. They were as good as their records would suggest. And I talked about it a second ago. Oregon State and Washington, two of my surprise teams in this conference. And then UCLA is a team that some people I think were maybe calling a surprise team in the preseason. And yeah, they turned out to be pretty good. So let's look at our predictions. We start with USC. I had them at 9-3. Athlon had them at 9-3. The over/under was 9.5. So they beat that, obviously going 11-1. And I was really close. I was really close to actually going with 11-1 and putting this team in the college football playoff. But as I was going through my predictions, I just thought, you know, with all the games that they play, all the tough games they play, and all the new faces, I just didn't know if it would come together in year one. And it did. I mean, they had a great season. I was wrong on this team. Knew that on paper they had the talent to be an 11-1 team, but just didn't know if they'd be able to pull it off. And like I said, they were able to do that, and they proved us wrong. Again, Athlon also had them at 9-3. There were some people out there that had USC going to the Pac-12 championship, so we'll give some credit to those of you that did pick USC to have a great year. Now, there were others that picked USC to go 8-4, 7-5, 6-6, and obviously that would have been way off. So Washington, I was high on this team, but not 10-2 high. I was 7-5, which was actually the over/under was set 7.5 for them. I didn't realize it was that high, so I guess a lot of people expected Washington to be pretty good this year, and I was actually below that mark. I thought I was going to be above the over/under there, but no, they were 7-5. Or I predicted them to go 7-5. They were 10-2. Athlon also had them at 7-5, so we had very similar predictions. And coming off the year that they had in 2021, I think that's why I thought that people would be a lot lower on this team, but I thought they had a chance to have a pretty good team. And like I said, they were even better than I expected them to be. Oregon, I had at 10-2. Athlon got them exactly right at 9-3. The over/under was at 8.5, so it was not all that high. Only one game higher than Washington. And I still go back to the Washington game. If Bo Nix had not gotten injured in that game, I fully believe they would have won that one. And maybe they would have beat Oregon State as well. Dan Lanning with a lot of questionable decisions in those two games, going for it on fourth down when he really should not have done that. I think Oregon was really close to being 10-2 or even 11-1, but those two games really hurt them. And then, of course, they got blown out by Georgia. So we were close on them. Athlon got them exactly right. Utah is a team that I picked to go 10-2. Athlon also picked them to go 10-2. Vegas was right on the money. The over/under was at 9. They went 9-3. I did have them losing to Florida. I can't remember all my predictions. I had them losing to Florida. I had them beating USC. I had them losing to Oregon. I can't remember now who else they lost to. Maybe it was UCLA. But that was the one game I would have missed. Again, missed them by 1. Just a little too high on this Utah team. But they proved to be the best team in the Pac-12. And if they were very close to being 10-2 like we predicted. Oregon State, talked about them a second ago being a surprise team. 7-5 was my prediction. Athlon 7-5. The over/under was only at 6.5, so we were right on Oregon State. We were actually wrong on Washington. I'm surprised looking back at this that Washington's over/under was 7.5 and Oregon State's was 6.5. I would have probably thought that Washington's would have been at 6.5 as well. But yeah, Oregon State, great season, beating Oregon at the end, and they beat my prediction by 2 games. UCLA beat my prediction by 1 game. I had them at 8-4. So did Athlon. It seems like we just had the same predictions as Athlon, which is surprising. My predictions aren't usually that close to theirs. The over/under was at 8.5, and UCLA beat that by 1 game. Again, beat my prediction. They were 9-3. Good season for them. Kind of didn't finish the way they wanted to, but still, I think UCLA fans happy with the 9-3 season. And that was your top half of the Pac-12. Let's go to the bottom half. You see Washington State, Arizona, Cal, Arizona State, Stanford, and Colorado. Look at how these teams were in one-score games. Look at Cal. That's the one that jumps out. 2-5 in one-score games. If they would have won a couple of those, they could have made it to a bowl game, but it didn't work out that way for them. Looking at our predictions, all right, so I was not high on Washington State. They had a ton of new guys coming in, a lot of roster turnover, but they proved me wrong, going 7-5. Athlon had them at 6-6. The over/under was only at 5.5, so the expectations were not to go 7-5 for Washington State, but they were able to do that. Had a great season, a very quiet season. Not a lot of people talking about Washington State, but they had a pretty good year. Again, going 7-5. Arizona had a great year for what they were expected to do. I had them at 4-8. Athlon had them at 4-8. The over/under was at 3. They go 5-7, almost making it to a bowl game. They were competitive in a lot of these games. They were 3-1, so they did really well in those close games. And again, Arizona with a good solid season. We missed them by 1 game. Cal, I missed by 1 game as well. They were 4-8. I had them at 5-7. Athlon actually had them getting to a bowl game at 6-6. The over/under was at 5.5. So I would have been correct on that one because we were just 1 game off and we were under that 5.5. And then Arizona State, we picked them to go 4-8. Athlon at 5-7. The over/under was at 6, which seemed way too high. That was kind of an easy pick there. But again, 3-9, even worse than I expected. And I thought I was being harsh, predicting them to go 4-8. It was a rough year there. Of course, they move on from Herm Edwards and a new era at Arizona State. Same thing with Stanford, a new coach there. This is the team that I missed probably by the most. I thought they were going to have a great year. I really did. I had a lot of pieces coming back, and they just didn't come together for them. I had them at 7-5. I give Athlon a lot more credit here. They were much closer to the prediction, but they had them at 4-8. They did have a really tough schedule. Against an average schedule, maybe they get to 5-7 at least, maybe, but still, they were not very good. The over/under was only at 4.5. So looking back, that was definitely a risk to pick them to go 7-5, and it's a risk that did not pay off. That's for sure. It seems like when I took a risk and picked a team to do a lot better than they were expected to do, I was usually wrong. But on the opposite side, when I pick a team to do worse than everyone else, it usually did turn out to be that way. Cal, an example here. We picked them to just go, 5-7, and they go 4-8. Although the over/under was only at 5.5. Arizona State would be a better example. 4-8 was my prediction, and wound up being pretty close there, even though the over/under was at 6. Texas A&M, I had them under where they were expected to be. That's what happened, but they were even worse than I predicted. But again, if you go through all my predictions, if I picked a team to have a really good year and no one else was predicting it, I was usually wrong. But again, flip that around. If we're picking a team to do much worse than everyone else is expecting, for the most part, I got those picks right, or at least it was closer to my prediction than what everyone else was saying. And that's interesting. Well, I'll have to look at that going into next year when I start making my predictions, and try not to take too many risks, overhyping teams, which is something that I should have done a better job on this year. Colorado at 1-11. I had them at 3-9. Athlon at 3-9. The over/under at 3. No one expected them to really do much, and they didn't. They were even worse than expected at 1-11. But now a brand new era there with Deion Sanders. That is going to be interesting. I can't wait to see what happens with Colorado. But my predictions in the Pac-12, again, not great, but overall, big picture, it was pretty close to what I expected. And at least, the top half and the bottom half, outside of Stanford, the top 6 teams were the top 6 teams that I expected them to be. Bottom 6, were as I expected, except, again, Stanford was that team that I missed on. Is there a team you missed on, a team that you overhyped or underhyped out of the Pac-12? Tell me about your predictions. Give me your thoughts on all this down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more here on the SG1 Sports College Football Channel.